Good morning, everybody. Today I will be refuting Jonathan's speech about orcas in captivity. Jonathan made the claim that orcas living in captivity offer significant advantages to them. He follows his first claim, which he stated, captive orcas allow better killer whale research. During his claim, he backs it up by saying that whales in captivity are better because scientists can go out and see them in their tanks to get the further research. He's claiming that SeaWorld have seen already the mating and the birth of orcas. His second claim was that orcas put in captivity or born in captivity will die if they're released. He gives an example of Kiko, which is also the Free Willy whale who died in a little time after he was released because he didn't have any human aid. Another example he uses was Morgan, an orca in SeaWorld Orlando which was captured to be set free but instead kept captive. His third and final claim was that killer whales live longer than those in the wild. He used Corky, an orca in SeaWorld San Diego that is currently 50 years old, and according to scientists, orcas in captivity should only live 20 to 30 years, and is further proved by naming other captive orcas that are over 25 years old. So let's start off with this first claim. Captive orcas allow better research. This claim is insufficient. He uses mating and birth to back up his claim. As I did further research, I found out that marine biologists actually like going to their natural habitat to know their how they act naturally. So for example, if we use penguins as an example, they are also captive animals that they're used, but for them to mate, the scientists have to know. They have to know what's the correct temperature, what's the correct sunlight, and the only way to know that is if they actually go to their natural habitats and observe them there. For example, as for orcas, they need to know. If they were to study orcas in their natural habitat, they would know that these animals love to travel in packs. They're considered the wolves of the sea. They travel in family packs, they hunt together and often live together most of their time. There's grandmothers that get to see their grandsons swimming with them in their packs. Also, it is important that they will understand their natural behavior, and which could also cause a decrease in the deaths of the staff and other orcas in SeaWorld. His second claim was orcas born in captivity or born in captivity will die if they're released. I think this argument answers itself. I believe it only takes common sense and a little bit of reasoning to know that something that is used to being babied and taken care of would face challenges as soon as it's released. An orca in captivity not once did not have to fight for his own food, therefore not creating the skills needed to do so in the wild. If we put an example, a child that has been blessed to grow up in a wealthy family and everything was handed to him till the age of 27, which was one of the Kaiko, the one that he used, that it was going to be released at 27 and instead kept captive. No, that was a Free Willy whale, Kaiko, the one that was released and then died. This man at 27 has no work experience, wouldn't know how to get his own food or pay for his own roof. Same thing would go for the whales. He doesn't have the skills necessary to live alone, hunt for his own food, and wouldn't know the skills needed to come across other orcas and join their family. So another example he gave to an orca was named Morgan. He said that Morgan was unsuitable to release, for it to be released, and that is false. The Netherlands gave permission for them to capture Morgan due to the fact that she was unstable, she was very skinny, she was ill, and they gave her the permission to do it as kind of like a humanitarian thing, where they were keep her in captive for 2 years, feed her, train her, and teach her those skills to go back into captivity. But during that time, they actually started putting her in her shows, and saw that she was a moneymaker for SeaWorld, that they instead kept saying that she was unstable for release and kept putting her in her shows. So they obviously saw Morgan as a moneymaker for the park instead of using her actually releasing her. And all this was caught from the actual lawsuit that they formed, which was Free Morgan. And Jonathan's third and final claim was that orcas in captivity live longer than those in the wild. He informs us that the scientists at SeaWorld stated that that orcas in captivity live approximately 20 to 30 years, and he disproves it by showing Corky, a 50-year-old orca living at SeaWorld, that's currently still living at SeaWorld. He tells us also about the other 4 that lived past 25. These examples are insufficient because Corky, he fails to notify us that Corky, the one that's at each at 50, has killed 7 of its calf alone. So that's more than the ones who have lived past 25, and those 7 didn't even pass 47 days old. Corky didn't have the skills needed to raise his own calf. She didn't know how to feed him or anything. She would constantly smack him against the tanks. And all those skills are skills that the orcas use, that they learn with their families. Their mothers teach them how to raise the calf and so far hunt, get their food and stuff like that. And she was often rejecting her babies and causing their deaths. These are the examples of the ones that live longer than 50, and he also fails to inform us how whales have died captive, the ones that are under 25 that have been in SeaWorld. There has been multiple. There's about 13 different deaths that have died due to like illnesses, some distress, because whales are usually, the orcas they're used to traveling about 100 miles daily swimming in their packs, and when they're concealed in a tank, they're not allowed to swim that much. And also to disprove about his 50-year-old orca Morgan, there has been a recent orca spotted named Granny, who is 103 years old in the wild. And also to know it's in the wild, an orca lives for the first 10 to 30 years, it's their mating season, and then after that, they live an extra 40 years, giving them about 50 to 80 years that they live when they're in their natural habitat. Thank you.
All right, you start off identifying the main and secondary claims, but it takes you a long time to kind of summarize the argument that you're presenting. So it takes, you're not getting to the essence of your argument for about a minute and a half. And when you go 721, so you're basically that first section of your speech accounts for all the overtime that you have. So you're going to have to edit a little bit and get to the point a little bit more efficiently, especially when the debates come up. That's going to be one of those issues where you just have to cut to the chase a little bit quicker. Your response on the first point is the advocate's proof was insufficient. I thought that was a reasonable challenge here. You do claim that marine biologists prefer to do the observation in a natural habitat. That's mostly asserted. You use an analogy to penguins, and I thought that's an interesting point, except again, it seems like it's mostly asserted in this situation. I think there's probably some differences between the penguins in being able to observe them in the wild and trying to observe orcas in the wild. For the most part, the penguins, even though they swim, they are land animals, and observing them is probably a little bit easier than following the orcas and seeing what their behavior is going to be. That would be my assumption, but I understand the analogy that you're making, and I think that the presumption that I'm talking about would probably be a response from the other side rather than a criticism of your argument right now. Again, I don't doubt that what you said here is accurate, that they travel in packs and that the families learn from each other. I do think that you need to demonstrate that information. It makes it sound, like Grandma Whale gets to see her grandchildren and that sort of stuff. Like she's walking them to school and that kind of thing. And, I think you're anthropomorphizing these animals a little bit. But the idea that they do pass on skills in the family thing, I think we need some more information that that is in fact true. You need to cite a source on that, because that becomes an important argument later on, because that's one of your responses to the issue of, on the second point concerning longevity. Your analysis of the Kiko story is an interesting one. It seems to me like you're missing one of the points here, and that is, why are these animals in this situation in the first place? And animals born in captivity can't be returned to the wild, blah, blah, blah. The argument is, the problem is that they are born in captivity, and so they don't learn those skills. That's the argument that you're making here, and that's why they die when they get released, not because they're not capable of doing those things, but because they were in captivity in the first place. Had that never happened, we wouldn't have the issue of having to release them. So it's like looking at the subject from a completely different perspective. I think you have to explain how that perspective ought to be shifted. The evidence from the case with Morgan, it sounds like you're quoting from the lawsuit, and I do think that you want to be consistent about that, cite that, and make sure that you use direct quotes there, so that we know that you're not just paraphrasing and you're telling us what you think the lawsuit is saying. The thing about Corky on that last point, I thought that was an interesting way of responding to the advocate's argument there. It says, well, Corky may have lived this long. There are problems. She's basically been unable to sustain 7 calves. This is when that teaching thing comes up again, and where that evidence would have been useful on that particular point. And Granny whale out there, 103. That sounds kind of interesting. We need a source on that one too. All right, thank you.